All right, guys, welcome back to Within Tolerance. This is episode 66, and we have a returning guest. We have Drew from Drewfab coming back on, and this time it's going to be a little bit different. If you guys don't know who Drew is, you can go back to, I don't know what episode number it is, but you can just search it and listen to kind of how he got into manufacturing. And this episode's going to be kind of just kind of shop updates. He got some new equipment, he's got some new products, he's got some cool stories he wants to share with us, and just talk everything about what's been going on in his world and then our world. So, Drew, what's new? I know you got a new machine. We can start with that if you want, unless you want to
Sure.
start with something else.
Well, first, thanks for having me back. I really do appreciate it. It's been cool. I mean, I feel like over the last few months, I've gotten to know both of you guys quite a bit better. So I think it'll make for a different experience on the podcast. So that's been kind of neat. But yeah, so starting with machine, we were actually going to do a video series on this, and I think it became kind of too daunting because videos are kind of a pain to be to be blunt about it.
Yeah.
So this may be a good opportunity to share that whole experience. So I started when we were on the pod when I was on the podcast with you guys last time. We were talking about maybe a lathe or whatever, right? Well, around the beginning of this year, Haas was running some screaming deals, and I just happened to hit up the Haas rep that works our area, and had said, "Hey, man, can you give me a quote?" Just kind of curious, right, for a VF2, and he sent me back this quote, and it was just bitching. I mean, like that's the only way to describe it, and it was way better than I expected it to be. And so then it kind of came down to, okay, how do I make this work, right? Because I have no three phase here at my shop's at my house, like a lot of the instant machinist community. Um, and so I started calling. We're being in San Diego, it's SDG&E, so I started calling them and talking to them, trying to figure out what I'm going to do about power. And once you open that can of worms, you can't close the lid. So after telling them that I'm going to be running a 30 horsepower spindle on a phase converter, they like freaked out and they're like, "You can't do that on overhead power." Like, okay, so and on the power that I had. So it started down this rabbit hole of, okay, can I get three phase? Well, yeah, we can give you three phase. We don't know how much it's going to cost you, but we can get you three phase. Okay, so then I went through like figuring out how to get permits and all this other stuff to be able to do it legally, right? Well, that was, I think, February when I started that conversation. No, it was March when I started that conversation. It's September and I'm still going through this. So we still don't have power. Machines being run on a generator, which is,
Really?
yeah, super inexpensive to run, if you can imagine. It's really not. It's like super expensive. It's killing me. But the yeah, I mean it's been a ridiculously nightmarish process. So basically, where we're at right now is we got the permit. That was cool. That was actually relatively easy. That has been like the least painful part of the process. And then now we're waiting on SDG&E, and they're using COVID as a kind of an excuse for being slow. They've had all the paperwork from us for like 3 months now, maybe two, somewhere in that
Ugh.
ballpark, and they haven't done anything. I was supposed to have paperwork to sign with my quote on how much it was going to cost me potentially, because it may not cost me anything. We're not sure yet. Um, 3 weeks ago, and I haven't even heard from the guy in 3 weeks. So it's like it's just frustrating. In any case, though, we got a generator that I've been running the machine on, so that's fun. And I was running it for like it's almost brand new, right? The generator. It only had like I think 1,500 hours when I got it, so it's very new in generator world. Um, and we were running for like 3 weeks. The guy just said, "Yeah, it's got a ton of fuel in it. It's got like 150 gallons of fuel on board. So just watch the fuel gauge, right?" So watching the fuel gauge, 3 weeks go by and the fuel gauge hasn't moved. I'm like, well, the tank looks okay. I mean, it doesn't look like it. You can only see one of the tanks as two, and you can only see into one of them. And the one that I could see into looked fine, right? Well,
Oh
I'm
no.
I'm cruising along and everything's good, and then all of a sudden, I left the shop just to go get something at the hardware store, and as I was leaving, I heard the generator like sputter and make a weird noise. Luckily, the machine wasn't running, and like it was on, but it wasn't doing anything. Um, and it sputtered and then died. I was like, oh, that's not good. So I immediately call the rental company. I'm like, hey, something ain't right. It looks like there's fuel in it, but I'm not a diesel guy. Like, can you send someone over? So they sent someone over and looked at it, and sure enough, it was out of fuel. The gauge was reading full, and because there's two tanks, one of the tanks has like a pump to pump it into the other tank, and that pump had died. So one tank is like 75 gallons, the other is like 40, and so it basically the fuel gauge was on the 75-gallon one, which the pump obviously died, maybe a week and a half in, so it was still probably still reading correctly potentially, but then it ran out of fuel. So that was pretty awesome. That took a whole day to figure out, which was not fun, but learning curve of doing all this stuff, right? So it's been an experience. So figuring out the power was probably the huge issue. We are going to get three phase. We got lucky. The power that is on my street, um, kind of without going into too much detail, we have one power pole feed my property and doesn't feed anybody else, which is actually really lucky. The reason for that is they screwed up and didn't put power to my property 50 years ago when they made the grid. So when they kind of ran everything, this piece of property didn't have any power. They put this pole on it like 25, 30 years ago. And so because of that, there's a chance we may have to pay more because it only feeds us. But my point to them is like, well, you guys screwed up and didn't bring power here. Why should I have to pay for your screw up, right?
Right. Well, and you're
So
going to pay them more anyway. Like I've heard a
exactly
few people where like, they didn't have to pay for their three-phase upgrade because it's
right.
like, well, I'm paying you more anyway. Like actually, I've got somebody locally who they have three-phase, but they're going up voltage now,
Right. Right.
and like the power company's doing it for free. They're like, well, you're going to pay us a whole bunch more money
Exactly.
over the next couple of years.
Exactly. So that's what I'm hoping they're going to come back with is basically no money out of pocket. It'll just be in rates. So, but fortunately, the lines, the power lines that pole's fed from, it actually is a three-phase circuit, and so they can just pull another phase off of that set of lines over to my pole. And weirdly enough, I'm in a residential area or kind of a mixed use area. It's like a farm agriculture kind of area. We have commercial three-phase power. It's 208 and it's got a 208 high leg in it, so it's 230 three-phase, which is not common for in a residential area. So got really lucky there. So didn't have to have like a transformer or anything with the machine. But I had to do all this research prior to pulling the trigger on the machine because we didn't even know, whether or not we could. Once the machine was here, could I get power to it, right? Um, and so I went kind of around in circles for a few weeks with SDG&E trying to figure all that out. And after they had told me that no, you can't do a phase converter, and I looked into a phase converter, and the one to run this machine, at least based on what Haas specs, is like I don't remember. It was like 10 grand or something like that. It was expensive, and that was a rotary. That wasn't even like a phase perfect. So I just saw dollar signs, right? I was just looking at my bank account, and it was screaming at me. Um, and so finally, kind of got some direction. We got 400 amps of 223 phase approved by SDG&E. Went and got the permit. That's all good. Panels all set. Paid the electrician to do all that. We rewired pretty much the whole shop. And then now we're just sitting there waiting, basically. So the machine is running. Just the machine is on a generator. We didn't liven the whole shop with the generator. So
That's awesome though, especially because you do fab work too. So I'm sure you'll be happy to be able to plug your welder into that too.
right. Well, that's one of the things we did. Since we rewired the shop, I had them put like a three-phase welder plug next to my welding bench because my TIG welder can run on either. Right. It'll do single or three-phase. And then I have a cold saw that I've been running on a phase converter for years. And so now I'll be able to get that off the phase converter and just on three-phase, which would be super nice. So and then I'll slowly transfer the other two machines that I have that are on. One's on a or both of them are on VFDs, so they take single phase in and produce three-phase. I'll slowly transition those over to three-phase too. So it'll just make everything more efficient in the long run. But been quite the painful process, to say the least, and
Yeah,
expensive.
that's crazy. I don't think I've talked to anybody else who's running a modern CNC on a generator. That's pretty. It's neat to hear that it sounds like besides fueling it and all that stuff, it's
Yeah.
not that big of a pain though.
No, and so I actually did some research on that, and when I called him up and I asked him about the generators, is it clean enough sine wave to be able to run a machine on it? And they said, yeah, no problem. So these are designed. The one that I have, because it's got to be big enough to run this machine, it's a 49 horsepower, and I think it's 45 kilowatt. It's huge.
Oh
It's on
wow!
a tandem axle trailer. It weighs like 8,000 pounds. Um,
Whoa!
Yeah, it's a big piece of equipment, and it's super quiet. It's probably quieter than most people's cars, quite honestly. Um,
Wow.
but it's designed to be like a backup generator for like a medical facility or something like that. So it's not like it's, you're not going to go down to Harbor Freight and buy one, right?
How much
Right.
does that cost to rent that?
So, because at my day job I work for Caterpillar, and the rental company that I'm getting it through is a Caterpillar dealer. It's Hawthorne. I get a pretty sizable discount. I won't say what, but the dollar amount that I pay per month is like $1,600 a month.
Okay.
So it's not the most expensive thing in the world, but it's a lot more expensive than power.
I was
Plus,
about
you
Yeah,
to
got to put
say.
fuel in it, right?
totally. Yeah, that's. But like you said, it's the only way you can run your shop right now, and so it
Right.
makes sense.
Right, and the shop's doing pretty good. So I mean, it's covering that and doing okay. It's just it's an added load on the business that I was not expecting.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I don't know many people who have done what you're doing, so
I'm a,
that's
I'm a
impressive.
revolutionary.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Redneck engineering at its finest, right there.
Get a generator to run your machine.
No,
Yeah.
what was actually really funny. It was the reason why we did it. It was an offhanded comment by the electrician. The electrician's a guy I race with, so we're kind of friends. And he was like, "Well, if you need to, just get a generator." I'm like, "Oh, you're full of crap. No, I can't do that." Right? And then like a week later, I'm like, "Wait a second. I don't have power. I'm not going to have power. The machine's going to be here. I need the generator." So it just kind of all worked out in a successful kind of way. It wasn't necessarily isn't ideal, but it's at least successful.
Totally. I mean, that's half the battle right there. Like
Right.
you're making money with a new machine, and it would be like, yeah, it's not comfortable to pay that kind of money forever, but it's better than having a machine sit with no power to it.
Right. Well, and so I don't know if you guys have been following like what Jake's doing with his new machine, right? But he had quite a bit of lag from basically when the machine hit the ground to when he had power, partially because he had the like phase converters and all this stuff. So with the generator, the super nice thing was the machine arrived on a Tuesday, and we had the generator there on Tuesday. Electrician was there, and we ran ran air on Tuesday because I already had the infrastructure for the air. And we were able to get them out to install it on Thursday. So it sat unleveled, I guess you could call it. We kind of ballpark leveled it, just eyeballed it, but it sat by itself for only 2 days without being installed. So that was one actually really big benefit of having the generator is it made that lag time significantly shorter because hooking the generator up is actually really would have been easier than hooking up the main power. So we were close with all the power and everything, but the generator was easier for sure.
That's awesome.
So got kind of lucky in that regard too. But
Yeah, you did. So I guess as far as the machine goes, talk a little bit about, you obviously got probing. We see the pictures on your Instagram, but then
yeah,
like you also got the Saunders Machine Works kind of whole system. You got the fixture plate, and then it looks like you got just one mod vise. And I know I had texted you a little bit and kind of talk us through your experiences with those products and kind of the benefits of them because I still struggle to fully understand the benefit of the mod
right.
vise. So it'd be interesting to see. I mean, you've been using it looks like quite a bit.
Yeah. So I got so on top of that too, I also tried out the new Haas tooling. I bought all of my first round of tooling was the Haas stuff.
Oh, cool.
Um, and I don't know if that's listening is contemplating buying that stuff, but it's actually pretty good. I've not had any issues with it. I have some techniques holders that I've gotten since then, and they're better. They're also twice the price or more. So I mean, you get what you pay for, right? The boxes from Haas do say made in China. I hope that's just the plastic. I'm gonna convince myself that's just the box that it came in and not the holder. But other than that, they actually everything's been pretty good. I haven't had any issues with holders or pull studs. The only thing I noticed, and this is probably unique to my shop gets everything rusts in my shop. I don't know why we're not by the ocean. We're quite a ways inland, but the Haas holders tend to rust a little faster than the Techniques ones for whatever reason. So just kind of no, just something I noticed, right? Um, as far as the Saunders stuff, so I did a bunch of research and I was like going through Kurt and Chick and Orange and trying to figure out what to do because I got a kind of a POS glasser and machine tool vice on my other one, and it was never sufficient. And I was looking at, for example, you look at like a Kurt, they're, I don't know, $600 or whatever for a Kurt vise. And orange, I think the big one was like 1,200, right? So
Mhm.
I'm just trying to figure out, it's like, okay, so I'm looking at spending $2,400 if I bought two orange vices. So if that's my budget, I can spend $2,400. What else is out there in that price range? And I started looking at other stuff, and I was listening to Business of Machining one day, and he was talking about his own products. I'm like, what do you make? I never knew. I never went on his website. And so I went on John's website and I was looking around, and the stuff's really looked really cool. And so I sent him an email, and he was super responsive and helped me figure out what made sense for what I'm trying to do. And so for those that don't know that are listening, so I do make some of my own products. We don't move a lot of inventory, unfortunately, right now. I think part of that's been COVID, but we're just, that part of the business has kind of been slow to get off the ground, but still kind of budding, right? But what I've been doing for years, and what I continue to do, is job shop work. Um, Started as fabrication, now is obviously machine work. So doing the job shop work, I need to be able to set up stuff as fast as possible, right? And be able to, like, I don't want to square up a vise. That just is unnecessary time, in my opinion. So I don't. If I can have a way where I can drop my vise on the machine table and I know it's square, that's a win, because then I don't have to break out an indicator and dial it in or anything like that. It's just time that I can save. Every minute that I can save is huge, because I only work 3 to 4 hours a day max. So if I'm only working, 25 hours a week, with the weekend, with a Saturday weekend, then I need every minute. So the Saunders stuff, if you guys aren't familiar, it's got, my plate's got like 800 holes in it. I misjudged that. That's a whole. I'll come back to that. It's got like 800 holes in this plate, right? And so for the first, I think it's like quarter inch, they're bored to just barely over half inch for like a half-inch dowel pin, and then the rest is half 13. So it works with all of your normal setup hardware that you might get, anywhere, right, from MSC or whatever. And then the mod vise is pretty neat. So his design, to me, is actually pretty genius. It's super simple and it works very well, especially in the use case for what I'm doing, which is quick turn stuff where all you're doing is making two or three of them or five of them, and you're just trying to move the stuff out the door as fast as possible. So the rigid base has two diamond pins in it, and you drop that down, it'll fit, into the bores, the precision bores. And so when I got the machine, the first thing we did when they powered it up before they put the tool setting probe on it is we put the Saunders plate down, and we threw an indicator in the spindle, and I dialed in the plate, and then I threw a vise in it, and I dialed in the vise just to make sure that they matched. And over the entire distance, it was out like 3/10 or something like that, over 30 inches of travel. It was like, it was dead on. There was more variation in the machine than there was in the table, which was super, or in the plate, I mean, which was super cool. So then we mounted the tool setter on it and all that kind of stuff. And so you set the fixed jaw on the table, and then you put two bolts in it, you torque it down. And then the way he does his tensioning, his tightening of the vise, it's the same mechanism on both the fixed and the moving jaw. Obviously, the fixed one you don't adjust it; the moving one you adjust it. But you put the jaw itself down. And he's got these countersunk screws that go in there, and it's kind of ingenious because it makes the jaws completely interchangeable, fixed to movable, which is like a Kurt, right? And then the other side of it too is it makes it really rigid. And then that's also on the moving jaw. What actuates the jaw is you loosen the countersunk screw, and then when you tighten it, it pushes the jaw into the part. So it does two things. It not only pushes the jaw into the part, but it also pushes it down. So that's one of the things I fought with my cheap Kurt knockoff vise is jaw lift, and it drives me nuts because it seems like no matter what I would do, I would get some level of jaw lift, which would make the parts come out funky, and I had to be super careful with it. So when you have this, it's literally forcing the jaw because you're tightening a countersunk screw into a countersink, a 100-degree, countersink screw into the jaw. It's pushing it both directions, so it can't lift, right? It's shoving it down into the table, and you can actually see it do it. It's pretty cool. The only thing I don't particularly like about them, the vices themselves, is if you set up soft jaws and you have kind of a non self fixturing geometry. So like if you have a circle, it's no big deal. But I did some parts the other day where they were very small and thin and narrow, and the geometry that I had cut into both halves of the soft jaws didn't lend itself a way to where it was self indexing when I put the jaws back together. And because the way his movable jaw works is you literally slide the whole thing back and forth on the table. You loosen 2 screws, slide it back and forth, and kind of butt it up against the part and then tighten it down. You guys can go watch his videos on that part. And then you tighten the countersink screws to kind of cinch it all together. So because of that, when you cut the soft jaws, if you don't put like a piece of aluminum or sacrificial piece in between and tighten the jaw against it, which I hadn't thought of at the time when I did these ones, you can make it where if the geometry is not self-fixturing, it doesn't kind of go where it's supposed to. You know what I mean? If that makes sense. I know I'm not describing that super well, but basically when you go to put it back in on the real part, it's challenging to get it in the right spot. That's the only kind of negative thing I have to say about it. But you can work around it, and the workaround is put a sacrificial piece in between there, set the jaw in the right spot, tighten it like you're going to tighten your part to the same torque spec, cut your jaws out, and then you remove the sacrificial piece and put your real part down in there. Then you never have to loosen the moving jaw on the table, right? So I don't know if that made sense or not, but if you go watch his video on how you assemble this against parts with soft jaws, it'll make some sense.
Yeah, I think it makes sense.
Yeah.
It sounds like a lot like a lot of the Mighty Bike clamps, where like you
Yeah, it is.
have like a torque plate or something like that, and then you cut it, and then it repeats. But if you just try to like do it open, then it's not going to do anything.
Right, right. And so the way that I think he shows on his site to the way that if I recall, I could be speaking out of turn, so don't quote this, but is you tighten the moving jaw, you space the movable jaw away from the fixed jaw at whatever distance you need, right? So let's say it's like 1.5 inches. So you tighten the jaw onto the base of the moving side, and then you put a spacer in there and you slide the moving jaw up against the spacer, and then you tighten it down. Pull your spacer out and cut your soft jaws. If you do it that way, that means when you loosen the soft or the moving jaw back up, it moves away from your part. So you have to loosen the base and slide the base again. So the better way that I found to do it is like you would do with a Kurt vise. You put a sacrificial piece in there or whatever, and you clamp against it and then cut your jaws. That's kind of what I was trying to describe.
Yeah, totally makes sense.
Yeah. So, and Payton, to kind of answer your question, I don't have one. I bought 4, and now I have a 5th. I bought another one just a couple days ago. And they're awesome. So I was able to put 4 of them, I believe, on the VF2, and I had room to spare.
Okay.
So, and you can turn them sideways. Like I have this one fixture that I put on there where you can turn it sideways, where I have to turn it sideways because it's too long in Y. So it's just a very, for lack of a better word, modular type of fixturing system, right? Hence the name Mod Vice. And it works really good. So the package is really small. It's only a 4-inch jaw, which is kind of a drawback, but I'm not doing any big parts right now, so it's not too bad. But I could see that being a drawback for some people that need bigger jaw widths. But I can put a ton of these things down on the plate, and they're cheap. I mean, relatively speaking, we're talking like $600 for a Kurt vise. One of these is $200, I think, is what his price is. So you're talking a $400 difference between the two, and if you can make his work, then go that direction, right? Granted, you got to buy $1,000 whatever plate to get them to work, but there's trade-offs to both, right?
Totally, yeah. So what about machine options? Because I mean, I feel like maybe some of your choices people would be interested in. Like I was surprised that you went with the umbrella tool changer, but then you did get probing, which I was super happy for you for, because I knew that it would just be, for what you do, it's amazing. So
it's invaluable. It's literally invaluable.
So yeah, let's talk about what do you have options wise, what spindle, what tool changer, all that stuff, and let's kind of walk through your decisions on those.
So about 3 weeks before the machine arrived, after I'd already bought the machine, I got a much larger customer than I had ever anticipated for the year. And so the time prior to that date drove what machine I got, right? I got the minimum viable product, which for us, like you said, was the umbrella tool changer. It's a VF2, not the VF2 SS. It's VF2 umbrella tool changer, 8100 RPM spindle. I got HSM, which is high speed machining for non-Haas lingo people. I got probing, and then I think I got the chip strainer was the only other thing I got. Oh, and auger. I got a chip auger because I didn't want to climb inside the machine to clean the chips out.
Good, good, good.
And, and literally, what drove that was I was looking at numbers, going, okay, here's what we make. Here's what we're bringing in consistently every month. Here's what I think we can do without the Haas, and here's what I think we can do with the Haas, based on just speed and efficiency, right? If nothing else, not to mention capability, and that's what drove it. That's what made me choose the machine I did. Had I gotten the large customer contract a month prior to when I did, and actually gotten the work, I would have gotten a VF2 SS. That would have been the only difference. I would have gotten everything else the same, but I would have gotten the SS, which
Just
has the.
because of the increased speeds and tools?
Honestly, I don't even care about the speeds of like the rapids and stuff, just because the spindle speed and the number of tools. I've
Got it.
already multiple times maxed out the tool changer. So the last, I think Dylan, I think you and I were, I don't know, I think I've talked to both you guys about it. The last parts I made, I had five or six tools in the tool changer smaller than the 32nd of an inch. And so it's just like,
That's my world.
yeah, right, exactly. And so I was like full on Danny Rudolph and Payton status, working with tiny stuff, and not doing it nearly as elegantly, but it was, that was like, oh crap, I could have used that extra 10 tool pockets.
And that RPM.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely, and even 12K is not enough, right? When you're talking like and the small end mill I had in the machine was a 10 thou. Even that, a 10K is nowhere near what it needs, but it's at least better than 8100. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, making a 10 thou wide and 12 thou deep slot sucks.
Yeah, it does.
No way around that.
Yeah, and at least it was aluminum. At least it wasn't like 316 or 304 or something. But yeah, that sucked.
Yeah, I don't blame you at all. I don't know. I can't remember if I told the story here about like one of my old teachers. He had like a slot just like that, and like the engineer forced him to make it, and then the other engineer on the product, and it ended up being like, why are you taking so long? He was like, well, I have to do this stupid slot. And he's like, dude, that is literally to show you where to put the adhesive. He's like, why are you not just, doing it with a chamfer mill? And he's like, because your drawing specs it out as like a square slot, 10 thou wide and 20 thou deep in
Oh man,
17.4. And he was like, dude, I don't care how you get it in there. I just need to, like, I need the assembly people to know where to put the grease or whatever it was, or assembly
jeez.
lube, or yeah. So it's, thanks engineers when you do that
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah. I got a buddy that I do some work for their business, and all the time when they send me drawings, I'll call them up about a dimension like you're talking. And he's like, oh no, that's fine. It doesn't need to be there. I'm like, dude, you got to send me a rev drawing because the drawing's my law. I can't do anything opposite of that, because if you receive it and measure it and it's wrong according to the drawing, then I'm screwed.
Yep, that's my contract. Like,
Yep, exactly. Exactly. So I make him redline stuff and send it to me every time I do something for him, pretty much.
there you go.
But
Well, cool. So it sounds like the options you chose are definitely, good options. Like, it doesn't sound like any money was misspent at all. Is there anything now that you've had it for a couple weeks that you wish you would have gotten
just
besides
honestly,
the SS?
yeah. The only thing that I have any regret about is the spindle speed and the tool changer. I have run into on two occasions now where I've not had enough y-axis travel, so that's kind of a bummer.
Interesting.
But that would have been a problem on my other machine too. My other machine actually has more y-axis travel than the VF2, but it would have been the same issue. So it's not really the extra couple inches probably wouldn't have made that big of a difference, quite frankly.
Okay.
I mean,
But
compared to the other machine you have, I mean, we always gave you shit for the tool changing.
yeah,
So, I mean, that's a huge time saver for you.
oh yeah, oh yeah. It's I
Not
can't.
making a mess and all
Oh
that.
yeah. I honestly I cannot express to you the difference in like just happiness running the machine.
Oh, I bet.
And having the 8K spindle is almost double what the other machine is as far as RPM, and just the finishes that I can get on the Haas versus the other machine, because I noticed as soon as I started running the Haas, I I started noticing how bad the spindle was on the other machine, and I could hear it. I was like, "Ugh, that's not good." So yeah, I'm gonna have to work on that at some point. But I had been chasing this like chatter issue on the outside of these parts for a long time, and I talked to Jake and I talked to a few others about it, and I even talked to the company that makes the controller, Mock Motion, and we couldn't figure it out. And then after hearing the Haas be so smooth, and then going and listening to the other, I figured out what it is. It's the gears in the head are starting to slop, and so it's chattering. It's literally the gears bouncing in the head as it's running around the contour of the part.
Oh, geez.
So, and kind of a sorry to jump on a tangent for a second, but total just randomness. I stumbled across a Craigslist ad like a year ago for a bunch of tool holders for that's an NMTB tool holder, right? And I was like, oh shoot, I need to jump on this because the guy had like 100 of them. And so I jumped all over it. We ran up there. Turns out the guy has the exact same machine that I have, and it had the original controller, and this one actually had the tool changer that it came with, because some of these actually came with a tool changer. It's painfully slow. It's not worth using, but still, it had it. And so I bought all the tool holders from him, and then we made a deal on the head. He's got basically a very low hours head for this machine, and I'm going to go get it here in a couple weeks, probably. So I'll have another spare head for that old machine too, which is just how random and how lucky, right, to come across the
Yeah.
most oddball machine in the world for in on the West Coast at least, come across another one and be able to use the head off of it. So
That is awesome.
yeah, so got kind of lucky there.
And that is a incredibly oddball size too. So
Oh, for sure, for sure. At least it's a 40 taper, so got some kind of nuts to it. But yeah, it's just it, who has nobody's got NMTV. There's a reason like all the new stuff is CAT or HSK or whatever.
yeah, totally. I don't know if I still have them, but I had a bunch of, I don't know if they were NMTB. They were like that though, or they might have been
Okay,
SK30. But
ISO
I
or
was,
one of those.
yeah, because I was going to buy this weird, before I got my business going and all that stuff, there was this like weird, what was it, TOS, like desktop mill kind of education mill that my old boss had, and it was trying to get me to buy. And yeah, it had a weird spindle. It had or had almost no control, pretty much. I would have had to retrofit it or something like that.
Right,
And so I ended up buying same thing. I like that night ended up finding tool holders on eBay and was like, oh, I should just buy these because when am I
right.
going to find these
Ever
otherwise?
again.
And then they just sat in my closet for the longest time.
Right. Yeah, I know how that goes.
Well, that's awesome. So the other thing I talked about before we started, so you prepped for your machine. You
Yeah.
cleared out some space. You did your floors. How was that whole process? Any tricks or advice you have now that you've gone through all of that? Like especially so many people epoxy their floors and then have regrets.
Right. Yeah. So posted quite a bit about that stuff when we were doing it. We built it was, I want to say, 500 square foot loft. We got I'll get to the epoxy, but I wanted to talk about the whole thing too, right? So the loft, we scored the most awesome deal on steel. I don't know how we managed this, but it was amazing. So the loft, we were going to originally use pallet racks to construct the loft, right? Which a lot of places do. And we started looking at it, looking at what we were going to put on it, and the live load was just going to be more than what we were comfortable putting up there. Um, and well, the live load that we are going to put up there, I'm sorry, is more than we were comfortable putting on the pallet rack. So we drove around to this steel shop that's around the way from us. They do very heavy fabrication, like they built the Petco Park Stadium, right? Stuff like that. And we were like, hey, do you guys have any like remnant that was left over from a job? Because stuff like what they're doing, they might buy, I don't know, 50 miles of steel whatever tubing and have it left over. Turns out they did. They had some 5 inch by 5 inch by quarter wall Galvy steel square tube, and they had 80 feet of it. And we walked up into the guy's office, and his buyer had been on the phone, and he goes, "Hey, how much for that tubing?" He's like, $4 a foot, give or take. The guy nods his head. He's like, yeah, probably something like that. And he goes back to his phone call. So he punches up the numbers real quick. He's like, it comes out to like $330. So just call it 300 even. And so we're we're getting ready to pull the money out, right? And his buyer gets off the phone. He goes, hey, I just looked that up. You're gonna have to like 4x that. He's like, it was like $12 a foot. He's like, I already made the deal. And I was like, well, we also brew beer, so you can come have some beer. He goes, deal. I'll call it good.
Oh,
So we got really a lot of tubing for a very reasonable price, which came out to, I mean, worked out fantastically. We ended up with something that we're really comfortable putting weight up there. So we got like I got 3 Ford engines that are sitting up there now. And then we constructed the whole thing out of, got a framer buddy, and he came over and did all the joisting and everything for us. So it's like 2x12, I think is what the floor is, with 1 inch or inch and an eighth floor board. So it's very stout. And that was the key to all this working, because there was a bunch of stuff downstairs in the shop that we needed to move to be able to make room for the machine, and then toolboxes and other stuff. And without having the ability to put that upstairs, it wouldn't have made the whole thing work, right? So everything was kind of hinging on that, making it work one way or the other. So, and then we decided to epoxy the floor, and we bought, I don't even remember what brand it was. My I basically gave my dad the credit card. And I said, here, go figure out what we need to do for epoxy as far as like the brand and everything. And a friend of mine does epoxy floors. And so we kind of pointed him in the right direction and gave him some information. And he came back with like this grayish, whitish color, which is what I told him I wanted. And we ended up doing all of it ourselves. We acid etched the floor. Well, first thing we did, actually, I take that back. Very first thing we did, because we had put a sealer on that concrete, is we just went and took like a floor buffer with a Scotch-Brite kind of wheel, and scuffed it, and pressure washed it, right, just to get as much of the junk off it as we could. Then we acid etched it twice and brushed it and all that, and then pressure washed it again to try and raise as much of the grit as you can, because you need some tooth for it to grab onto, right? And then the way we were told to apply it was with a very dense snap roller. And where we went wrong was we rolled over we rolled the epoxy on, and then when we rolled it over it one more time, right? So like, it was, you roll it down and then we went over it once more. Well, you're not supposed to do that. We didn't know this. So we get the whole floor done, and we're looking at it, and it's like there's these little like things in it. We couldn't figure out what the hell it was. Well, the nap, when you go over it the second time, the little strings were coming off in the epoxy, coming off the roller into the epoxy. And at first, we were all bummed out about it until we walked on it. And it turned out to be an amazing anti-skid. So it worked out fantastically, because it makes it where you don't really slip and slide on the floor when it gets a little bit wet, which epoxy is known for, right? So that was like the only, I guess, kind of lesson learned, is if you want a nice, smooth, pretty surface, and you are going to roll it, don't roll over it a second time, because it will leave the lint down on it. But if you want a non-skid, that's a really easy way to get a non-skid, because it epoxies the little strings, and it becomes hard as a rock. So it actually was kind of a
Go figure.
right. It just was kind of an unforeseen. Oh, well, that was kind of a screw up, but it worked out. So, but the only thing I don't like about the epoxy, and this would be to anybody that's going to do epoxy, is it does tend to chip if you drop something heavy or sharp on it, or heavy and sharp on it. I've chipped it in a couple spots already. But I mean, you can touch it up. It's not awful. And it also takes a whole lot longer to cure than I ever knew. That was one thing that almost like slowed the whole program down to a halt. So the epoxy itself takes 24-ish hours to cure to walk on, and it's like 2 days or 3 days to drive on. However, we were told to put a polyurethane on top of it because it helped protect it from the UV. And we got roll-up doors in front of it, so it made sense. Well, that stuff takes 7 days, 5 to 7 days to cure.
Wow.
And we were 5 days away from the machine being delivered. So my dad and I actually came back down to the shop at like midnight one night to reapply the second coat of polyurethane, because we needed to have it. We needed that extra 12 hours, right? Because we were going to be driving a forklift on the stupid thing.
Yikes. So that's a very good lesson, I think, right there.
Right. Yeah, that was. I wish we'd known that like a week prior. We would have started a week prior. But in all honesty, it worked out really well. Everything kind of came together at the right time. The machine install was super easy. I don't remember the name of the riggers that did it, but they did a great job. And it was the where we ended up putting the machine. I was a little worried they were going to have some trouble getting it in because our car lift is right next to it. But they were able to just cruise right in, set the machine down, and cruise right out the other door. So it worked out really, really nice.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So you had also said that you wanted to talk about some business stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So one thing I know we've kind of talked on and off about business stuff here and there. And I thought it would just be kind of cool. So I wanted to talk more actually about my dad's business. I don't talk really a lot about my parents or their business dealings or whatever, but I think for this audience, it makes some sense. And it's something I've been wanting to share. And I think this is the right place to share it because all of us are kind of in the same boat, right? We're all trying to start these businesses and get them off the ground. And um, I've been very lucky to have the resource in my parents that I do. So my parents have owned a vending machine business, so they own and operate vending machines since 1983. So they've been in business just shy of 40 years. Um, at their peak, which was in 2015, I believe, they had, I think, almost 30 employees. They were the largest independent vending contractor in San Diego and Imperial counties, actually the only in Imperial County. Um, and they served a total of, it was like, basically they went from Camp Pendleton, which is, north of San Diego, all the way down to the border in San Diego and all the way out to El Centro, which is a huge amount of area, right?
Yeah,
And there's
seriously.
two other larger companies. One's a huge corporate conglomerate. One's a slightly smaller corporate conglomerate that they were competing against, but they were literally the last man standing here in San Diego. They ended up selling part of the business in 2015 to one of the big corporations, and then scaled back. And they still have a fair amount of business here in San Diego, but most of it's out in Imperial County. So one of the things that kind of blew my mind, right, was when my dad and I were talking about this stuff. They started in 1983. They started on the heels of a business my dad had worked for that was a vending company called Valley Vending. He was kind of the general manager of Valley Vending, and the guy was closing down. And so I don't remember the timing exactly. He told me, I just don't remember. But basically, they had said after they closed, "Hey, why don't you go start your own vending business and I'll be your financial backer." Okay. So in year one, they had 40 vending machines. That's what they started out with, which is pretty small. And it was basically just my dad. And he's always busted his ass. I mean, when I was a kid, there was many, many years, and I'll kind of get into this, where he would get up before the sun would come up, before I was awake, and he wouldn't come home until the sun had gone back down. Just worked ungodly hours. Um, but year one, like I said, they had 40 vending machines, and by year three, they had 400.
Wow.
Wow.
So, I mean, to me, that's just mind-boggling, right? That's like a machine shop going from having one machine in year one to like 20 machines or something like that, 10 machines in year three. That's just an incredible amount of growth. And they were doing really good, and they were killing it, kicking ass, and hit their peak in the mid 80s, like 87, 88, I think, before kind of things slowed down like they did in the early 90s. And the thing that resonated with me the most was this one little story that he's told me. So I was a kid. I was probably 5 years old, and so the business was struggling. This was the early 90s. This was 93, 4, 5, somewhere in that ballpark, maybe 96. I don't know, somewhere in that range. I don't remember exactly the date, but business was struggling. Economy was kind of in the shitter. And they had so previously he had several accounts up in LA. they had the Broadway stores, which, big chain of department stores, and they had lost that chain of department stores, and this was by itself probably 400 machines. It was a huge account. Um, and then he had gotten the Spay War account, which they, I believe, still have today, here in San Diego. But there was also, just in happenstance, a huge technology changeover. And so all of the equipment that he had owned at the time was completely obsolete and couldn't use anymore. There was
Oh,
no parts for it.
jeez.
So he had this conundrum where I lost all this business, right? So I'm down revenue. I have all of this business that I went and just got, but I can't, but I don't have the machines for it. I got to go buy new machines. But because the economy's in the shitter, I don't have any money, right? So he went and applied for this loan. This loan was, I think, like 400 grand, which is a lot of money back then. And when it took a while for the loan to kind of mature, at the time, my mom had gone back to school. My mom's a CPA now, and she had gone back to school and gotten her degree in finance. And part of the stipulation of this loan was that my mom had to be working a full time job. So she was working actually as a finance auditor in the Naval Audit Service, and she was actually working back in Washington D.C. at the time. So my mom was on one coast, we were on the other, and my dad's business was, hovering barely above, just basically right above nothing. And so the, kind of waiting on the loan to come in and whatnot, he was 24 hours away from telling his guy, literally. So his guys came into the shop one day, and he was waiting on the bank to call him, and they hadn't. And all the guys go home, because guys go home around 2:30, 3 o'clock usually,
Mhm.
his business. And he didn't get a call till like 5:30 that night. And the next morning, he was going to tell all his guys they had to go find new work,
Oh my
because,
goodness.
and he got the call, and he got the loan that they had basically granted him. Yeah, we'll give you the loan.
Whew.
Um, and what was even crazier than that? So that was like Monday, right? The day, 2 days prior to that, it was just he and I, and we lived off of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for like 3 months that summer. And I didn't, at the time, didn't understand entirely why we were living off of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Now I understand, because we didn't have anything. That's all we could basically afford.
Right.
But this was on Friday, and 6-year-old me loved drag racing. I worshipped the drag strip and worshipped my dad, right? And so he said, "Why don't we go to the drag strip tomorrow?" Well, he told me just a couple of years ago that he took the last $40 that he had in his wallet and took me and him to the drag strip. We
Oh
ended
my
up winning.
gosh.
We ended up winning that day, and we brought home like $200. And I didn't even understand. I had no idea, right, being a kid, the gravity of the situation. But like he told me, he's like, "What do we got to lose? We're either broke, and I got to find work on Monday, or we're not, right? So what do we got to lose? Let's go have some fun." And there's a picture that the photographer at the track took of me and him standing in front of the car on that day, and it's his and mine personal, both of our favorite pictures of each other. And it's like, but I didn't realize until a couple of years ago why it was his favorite, because it was not only time with me, right, but it was literally like the time frame when his business was at this point where it could have gone to nothing and gone away, or did what it did and succeeded. Um, so then, kind of fast forwarding, right? So we he got the loan, and fast forward to 2000 and I think 10, and the Better Business Bureau here in San Diego did an article with the Union Tribune, and they interviewed, like, I think it was 5 of the, what they called the top small business owners in San Diego County, and my dad was one of them. And
Wow.
so he was featured in the Union Tribune.
That's really cool.
And so you go from, this verge of falling apart, and just everything's crumbling in on you, right? To the epitome of success, being voted by a very large, body that does this as one of the top business owners in San Diego, which was pretty cool. And I don't want to share numbers, because it's not kind of this is not the forum to share numbers. But at the peak in 2015, they were doing extremely well. Like I said, I think like 30 employees. We had a 5,000 square foot facility here in San Diego, 3,000 square foot ish, maybe 4,000 in El Centro, and then they had a total of, I want to say 1,500, maybe 2,000 vending machines.
Whoa.
So you can kind of put together what that would be. It was a very at the time a very lucrative business. And then when he sold, we downsized tremendously. So, but yeah, I've listened to a lot of people talking about business, and they talk about their successes, but it's it's really interesting to me, especially being so close to it, of course, seeing like that level of strife and then the success that's followed by it, or potentially followed by it, right?
So would you relate this story to some of the people starting out with, buying your first machine, taking that big risk, and knowing that it's going to pay off? Like, how would you relate that to kind of our community?
Right. Yeah. So to me, the thing that I took away from it, right, was that no matter how much it feels like it's crumbling in on you, you got to try and see what it could be, and you got to keep pushing through it. And the other side of it too is you might fail, but you have to be okay with the fact that you might fail. I think too many people put too much pressure on themselves that I have to succeed, right? You have to be successful. No, you don't. And sometimes from those failures is what will come. The success will come from that, right? So um, that to me is the biggest thing, and it's not that's not specific to the machinist community. That's just a universal thing with business. Is you don't necessarily have to succeed because that first business may not be the right one. It might be the second or the third or the fifth. For my dad, it was like his third. So, but when you're talking, like you said, this specific to the machinist community is to make the right decisions. What you feel in your gut is the right decisions at the right time, and putting in the work and creating your own luck. Right. My dad talks about that all the time. Is creating your own luck. You you can do you can do everything right as far as like the business books and stuff like that. You can do everything right, but if you don't put in the work and you don't put in the effort, then it may never, more than likely will never amount to anything. Because when you put in the work and you go and hit the streets and you bug people and you talk to people about this stuff, then it becomes real and people remember you. And that's what creates the luck, is because you'll never know what that one conversation might have. And for in my case of my dad's business, it came through in the case in way of a loan. But for a machine shop, it might be a huge contract, right? It could be, you were just out there in the right place at the right time talking to somebody about what you do. You gave them a business card, and lo and behold, they work at Lockheed Martin, and you just got a contract 3 months or 6 months later. And it was that at that moment when you were crumbling and you get the call for that contract, right? So it's a combination of things. Being willing to take some risks, because that's important, but take calculated risks. That's one thing my dad's always done, and what I do too is take very calculated risks. Don't You can get lucky and you can throw logic to the wind and jump, right? But the best way I know to do it is to take very calculated and measured risks, because you can take all the risk in the world and fail, or you can take a calculated risk and fail. So it's a matter of what you're willing to give up or what you're willing to potentially lose, right?
Totally. So, speaking of calculated risks, last time you were on, you were debating a new machine and very nervous about it. How are you feeling about your decision?
Um, as of today, I made the right decision.
Okay.
Check back with me in a year. We'll see.
Oh yeah, yeah. We'll definitely
But
have you
no,
back on.
yeah, I mean, I do. I feel like I made the right decision. How about you? I mean, Dylan, you bought a machine not too much before I did. I mean, how do you feel?
Yeah, same. Like, and again, it was very much in the vein of what you just said. It was a calculated risk. Like, our machine payment was low enough that, like, at the absolute worst case, if everything fell out of the bottom of our business, Brad and I could afford the monthly payment.
And
Uh,
that's where I was at too. Same
yeah,
kind of
yeah. So it is definitely a calculated risk. It was not like, oh, I bought $1 million automation cell and I'm hoping I get the work, and if it's not, then I'm going bankrupt. Like, it would suck, but I could we could swing it, as a company and as owners if we needed to.
right. And that was kind of the conversation I had with my wife. I was looking at the numbers. I said, look, you know, worst case scenario, absolute worst case scenario, bottom falls out, everything's gone, right? There is no business anymore. We can still make the payment, and I get a really cool toy, right? So
Yeah.
that was a very stressful time trying to figure out, like, gut check. Okay, can I do this? And I was putting a lot of pressure on myself, and I'm glad I backed off on that a little bit.
Yeah, it's not an easy choice for sure. You're not signing your life away, but it kind of feels like it at the time.
Yeah, and actually, so it's to use a really bad drag racing analogy. Um, Sometimes you have to let off to be able to go faster, right?
Hmm.
So when you're in a, I'll elaborate on that. So in a top fuel dragster, um, if you hit the brakes too hard when you hit the finish line, it can cause the car to bounce, which means you're not stopping because the tires are in the air. And so what you have to be able to do as a driver is let off the brakes, let the car settle down, and then grab the brakes again while you're seeing the sand trap that's getting very, very close to you and coming at you, right? And I think business is much in the same way. Sometimes, we put all this pressure on ourselves to, I know Peyton, you're kind of going through this right now too, all this pressure to keep hauling ass and push and push and push, work 7 hour or 7 days a week, 23 hours a day, everything you can do. But sometimes when you pull back a little bit, is when you actually start going faster.
That's a great way to put it.
And
Yeah.
I noticed that with myself. Dylan, we were talking about this the other day. And I've been putting a lot of pressure on myself to, like, create this huge business, right? This multi-million-dollar corporation, if you will, and have hundreds of machines and hundreds of people, and that's been this kind of dream, I guess you want to call it. But what I forgot was where I started. And where I started was a kid with nothing, no, 18-year-old kid with a Harbor Freight welder and a chop saw in his parents' garage that wanted to be a fabricator. And my whole dream with that was to be able to afford, and why I started making stuff for people was to be able to afford to fund my own hobbies and also to buy me the tools that I wanted. And once I kind of realized that again, that this was the point of what I was trying to do, um, it kind of made me relax a little bit. It's like, okay, I don't have to set the world on fire. I just have to continue doing what I'm doing and doing it at a reasonable pace, so that way I can achieve these goals in a reasonable amount of time.
Yeah, 100%. And talking to you the other night it's like I definitely feel torn both ways.
Sure.
Um, like we definitely, Brad and I, maybe not in the very beginning, but like when we started, buying machines and things like that, like we had a very clear goal of like we want to build this to the point we can sell it. But at
Right.
the same time, half my shop is filled with engines and car parts, and it's because that's the other reason we got into this was like, oh, we just want to be able to make the fun parts that like nobody makes for our cars or that like we can't afford at the time or something like that. So
Exactly.
I definitely I feel that deeply. Like when you said that the other day, I was like, yeah, yeah, I totally understand that.
It was weird. It was like an epiphany. I think I was talking to my dad on the phone, about business and stuff. It was just like light bulb went on. I was like, "Hey, dummy! Like, you kind of lost sight of what you originally wanted to do."
Yeah, yeah. Well, and like one thing I think I've gotten away from that I had done for a while was like I would take on two or three jobs just to make money and like
Yep.
they might be easy and I might just be like banging my head against the wall with how bored I am, but I made sure that like every third or fourth job was like a tough job that like grew my skills or like was something I was interested in, and like maybe I wouldn't make a ton of money on it, but I would learn a bunch and like feel good at the end of it. And so I feel like we all have to do something like that every now and again just to or at least our style of businesses need to do that kind of thing to feel fulfilled.
Right. Well, and I think the opposite is also applicable, right? So for me, the last 2 months or so, this big customer I was telling you about, they're a tech company, and I'm making these consumer electronics R&D parts, little tiny things, and it's super challenging. And all I've done for the last 2 months is just bang my head against the machine, trying to figure out how to make these stupid things because they're super challenging. And then it was nice to have I've got a little bit of a lull where I'm making like some race boat parts, which is super cool. I love It's like my passion, my hobby, but it's for someone else, right? And so it's nice to be able to kind of like, okay, I'm going to take a mental, vacation for a couple of days and go back to just making stuff that's fun.
Yep, totally.
Yeah, and kind of going
Yeah,
with your analogy, I love the concept or the idea that I'm in the phase where I'm letting off the gas and on the brakes a little bit, but I'm still
Yeah.
going way further.
Yep. Your mental fortitude makes so much more difference than anything else. Is one thing I have realized. I notice it. And so we've talked about it before offline, where I have a set a set quitting time. I quit at 6 o'clock every night. Occasionally, I will go later, but that's the exception, not the rule. And once I started doing that, I noticed that my productivity got so much better because I was sleeping more, and on the days that I do stay later, like 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock, I notice my productivity just going down dramatically. And the nights that I do that, probably 9 times out of 10, I don't get nearly anything done because you're just losing mental capacity as the night goes on after working, after being up, in my case, since 6 or 5, or I'm sorry, working since 6 and working till, 8, 9, 10 o'clock, your body's done, and so you have to give yourself enough time to kind of reboot.
Totally. Yeah. So complete change of gears,
Sure.
jumping back.
Yeah.
We talked quite a bit maybe a week ago. Let's go over the trials and tribulations of tape and glue work holding,
Oh
and
yeah.
maybe some lessons you've learned there as well.
Yeah. So, um, tape and glue has been my lifesaver. Little parts suck. So, yeah, all of these parts I've been making are either made of plastic, specifically polycarbonate for the most part, or aluminum. And all of them are not conducive to holding in a vise for one reason or another. Either they're thin, they're big and flat and thin, or they're small and thin, or just the geometry's funky, things like that, right? So I was recommended to use double-sided tape, and I bought exactly what was recommended, and I did exactly what was recommended, which was make a fixture, which I did, and I put myself a little corner so I could butt the parts up into a corner so that way it'll self-locate, both on op one and op two, and then it worked great for one round of parts. Went to start the next round of parts, different job, same customer, different job, and the wheels fell off. I could not
Mhm.
get it to stick. Nothing I did everything exactly the same. Never worked again. And I was just pulling my hair out. And I had used the Saunders tape and glue, tape, glue, tape kind of method before, with blue tape, with, I would say, some success. It wasn't totally successful, but it was successful enough to get me through the situation. Um, but I went back and, like when we were talking about Dylan, I was just kind of going through every little detail of it, trying to figure out everything I could. Um, and what the conclusion I came to with it, and I've been using it now. I've every single day I've turned the machine on, I've used glue and tape for the last 2 weeks.
Oh my goodness.
I've gone through an entire roll of blue tape. So I've gone through an entire roll of blue tape and almost 2 bottles of the 3-ounce bottles of super glue, from McMaster. So the conclusion I came to was the Scotch 3M blue tape clean the surface super, super well. I use so my coolant is oil and water, right? It's
Hmm.
water based. So I actually rinse the palette off with DI water because I only mix my coolant with DI water. And So I rinse the palette off with that before I do anything. I blow it off with air, get all the water off of it, and then I spray it down with acetone. And then the most irritating thing that I've ever had happens every time. I don't know what it is with the Haas coolant system, but it always drips.
Yep. That's every coolant system, not just yours.
It is the most irritating thing I've ever had happen because I'll get it all clean and I'll get everything prepped. I'll put the tape down. I'll put the tape on the part. I'll put the super glue on it. And I'll walk over there and there's a freaking puddle of coolant sitting there. I'm going, what the hell?
Yep. Yeah.
So
Putting my fixture plate on, we were doing the dry molly, and like I would spray an entire coat over the entire table and no drips. And then just as I'm about to go back and wipe it down, one drip would drop every single time, like from some
every time.
random place in the machine. I was like, you've got to be kidding me.
Yeah. I ended up actually starting a couple days ago. I started jogging the table over away from the coolant nozzle, and it helps a lot. But it's still not perfect because it drips and splatters. But in any case, I've been using acetone. I know John talks about alcohol. right? That's his thing is denatured alcohol, or I don't know if it's denatured, but isopropyl, something like that, right? Here in California, in our wonderful state, we can't get isopropyl alcohol anymore, at least not very easily. Like all the hardware stores don't have it, so it's kind of hard to come by. At least the good stuff, the 99% or whatever. So I have to use other stuff. So I chose acetone, which oddly enough I can still get, um, and it seems to work really good. Something about the acetone, it's I guess the glue and the backing that the tape is made of is semi-soluble by acetone. And so what I've noticed, I'll clean the palette with acetone, I'll lay the tape down, and then I'll actually clean the backside of the tape with it, and it makes the tape tacky.
Oh, really?
And yeah, it makes, and I do that with both the palette and the part. So then when I lay my glue down and I stick it down, I kind of pound it with my fist, and then I grab some parts or something that weighs a lot or heavy and sit it on it. And that seems to help with the adhesion process a little bit. It's nothing, it's not a lot, right? But as long as you're not doing something kind of crazy with it, it's going to stick. But I've the parts I posted, or I think it were in my story yesterday. It's a it's a part for a race boat, goes on the bottom of a boat. I machined those completely with tape and super glue.
Oh, awesome! I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so I did all. It was two operations. I did both ops with tape and super glue. So
Oh, very cool. Yeah,
it works.
I also use acetone. I didn't use alcohol, and I think it works great. Like I
Yeah,
don't see any problem with it.
yep. The only thing I noticed with the acetone, like if you wipe the tape down like I do, I use the blue shop towels. You have to be careful. The shop towel itself will kind of come apart because the tape gets so tacky, it'll pull the towel with it. And so you kind of got to be careful and make sure you get all the lint off of it. Otherwise, you'll end up with a funky high spot.
Yeah, but yeah, and I think weighing it down with something is also a super big key.
Yep.
I threw a few parts before I started doing that, and then I don't think I've thrown one. I mean, granted, I don't use it nearly as much as you do, but
Right.
I haven't thrown one since then. I would usually put like a vice body or something like that, like something
Right.
fairly heavy, and let it sit for a couple minutes just in case. I mean, I use the TP10 super glue with the
Okay.
activator, so it's supposed to set within like 10 seconds or something like that. But even
Right.
even with that, it's like, you know what, I'll just let it sit. I don't want to throw a piece again.
Yep.
I at one point had a piece come up off of it and start spinning around with my tool, and ever since that, it's like, I'll take the extra minute to avoid the helicopter inside my machine.
Yeah. I had that happen with a plastic part, and it was about 2 inches from my tool probe, and I was like, "Oh God,
Oh
Yeah, it's
boy.
no
that
fun.
was a very fast e-stop. Holy crap!"
Yeah. Have you had a chance to use the powder coat tape? Because I know you got some of that too.
I did, and it was the most frustrating experience of my life.
Laying it down.
Yes, because I don't know what thickness we were talking about different thicknesses, right?
Yeah.
And I got the thinnest they make, and the reason I got that was because the thicker the medium, right, the more chance you have the part just wiggling, I guess, back and forth on it.
Hmm.
Uh, and I went to lay the tape down, but it's like working with cellophane almost, and I could not get it to lay down without somehow wrapping it against itself. I spent like an hour on both the part and the fixture, and I was just like, okay, I'm gonna take a step back. I'm gonna put that down for now. I'm gonna go grab the blue tape, and I'm gonna go this route.
Yeah, I think I use the. I want to say it's 30 thou. It's the green one,
Okay.
and it's not easy for sure. Like that was one reason that we like invested in vacuum for those grills we make. Is like we would spend, I don't know, a few hours. Like if we had a run of 20 grills, like it would be hours of just like laying tape and popping bubbles and making sure it all sat flat and like sanding the pieces so that there was no high spots. And, there was just so much prep work. It was like, this is losing us money. Like I can't charge my customer for it, one, and B, like it just was aggravating. So, but like onesie twosies, like I just made prototype grills recently, and I was like, I'm not making a vacuum pallet for that. Like I'm just gonna use super glue and tape.
Yeah, it's a solid 15 minutes or more in
Yeah.
between. Like it's at least 15 minutes, and I kind of go a little beyond like what you're talking about. Letting it set. I probably let each one set for somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes, just because I don't want to throw apart. That's what it boils down to. And I even changed my machining strategies too, so where I'm trying to shove it into the corner that it's butted up against, so that way I got a little mechanical help too. So it's not ideal. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I know your pain for sure.
I think vacuum is in my future. I think Pearson's system is going to make the most sense because for the parts I'm doing, his pallet, just the vacuum plate itself, will work fantastic for op ones for everything I'm doing, and then for op two on a lot of these parts, I can put his sacrificial plate down, and most of the parts I can do like a conventional, to do like a special, you know, yeah, I don't need to use cord stock for most of it. I can just do small O-rings or something like that. So I think his system is in the future. It's just a matter of when. Trying to get stuff paid off first, and then investing more. Only investing what I need when I need it.
Yeah,
That's the way to
yeah,
do it.
it's important for sure.
Don't want to get overdrawn. That's the biggest thing.
Yep, yeah, especially when you think everything is going good. That's exactly when you can start making mistakes like that.
Right. Exactly. So I do want to say this, and this is not at all to poke at you, Peyton. This is actually
Uh-huh.
legitimate. This is actually legit. So
Uh-huh.
one of the things that I did not know, I have to say that I take that back. I knew, but I did not realize how valuable it is until I started doing it. Was being able to post probing from Fusion for everything, and I mean everything. Literally every part. I might set it. I might set the part and probe it, like to set G54 for the first part. But then when I set the next one in there, I don't do anything. I tell it to probe it, and it does it. I never have to dial parts in. And then like with some stuff, especially when you're talking like op one, I just kind of slap it down somewhere in the vise, and I'm like, that's kind of close, and I tell it to probe it, and it approaches from a half an inch away, and it always hits the part, and it always tells it where it's at. It's absolutely amazing. It's life changing. It was like I heard the heavens open up and angels start singing.
Every angel except for me.
I am. I'm glad I'm not the only one saying these things. It's nice.
And I do mean this seriously. I'm not trying to like guilt you or nothing, but I do believe you can probably benefit from it because even if it's just a matter of like locating an op one of a part in a vise, you never have to go and indicate it again, like or edge finder. Like you don't have to be precise with it, right? If you're doing three parts, the first one you set it up, and then the rest of them you just kind of put them in there, kind of eyeballed, and you're good to go.
Yeah,
Yep.
like I was telling Dylan, I'm looking into some work holding and whatnot, and if some things happen this coming week, I might just have to pull the trigger, but we'll see.
I really do wish you the best on it because it could be awesome, and I hope it works for you if you do pull the trigger.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, but I had to throw that in there because it was literally the most life altering experience I've had in machining.
Man, I
It
swear
is.
everyone works for Renishaw these days.
It is
Uh,
so nice to not be the only one saying that.
one question I do have, Dylan, you would know the answer to this probably. I want to get some smaller diameter probe tips,
Hmm.
just because a lot of the parts are tiny, and so the big stock one that they send it with is just
Giant. Yeah.
huge. Yeah. So I'd like to get some smaller ones, but I haven't found a great resource on. Like my Western tool rep says, "Oh yeah, we can get them," but like he doesn't offer anything beyond that, right?
Oh no. QMark Direct is fantastic for them, or carbideprobes.com.
Okay, I'm gonna write that down.
I'm using a 2 millimeter ball right now in my machine because for the exact same reason, I had like a little, I think it was a 55 thou step that I had to probe, or like a counter bore that was 55 thou deep
Right.
that I had to probe. And I was like, well, I'm not fitting a 6 millimeter ball in there. And yeah, going
Oh,
down to a 2 millimeter ball was easy, and took, I don't know, half an hour maybe to dial it in and set it up and calibrate it and all that stuff.
how often do you redial in your probe and your like tool setter probe?
The tool setter I hadn't done, I don't know, maybe in 6 months or something. And then when we put the new subplate on, we had to do it.
Yeah, right.
But the probe I try to do, I don't know, at least once every couple months.
Okay.
At least just check it. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know how the Haas routines are anymore. Like, does yours probe and then rotate 180 and then probe again?
No, it
Okay.
leaves the probe facing one direction.
So you have to indicate your gauge ring in within a couple tenths then.
Yeah, and so that's what when we put the probe in the machine, I grabbed my best indicator I got is a 1/10, and I dialed in within a tenth.
Okay, so see that the nice thing about some of the routines, and even Renishaw offers it on a few of them. But if your machine has 180-degree capabilities, it'll do an advanced calibration routine where you just put the probe in the middle of the ring, like roughly.
Oh,
So
okay.
like for me, it takes 2 minutes to set it all up. Like I magnet my ring to the top of a device jaw, jog my probe into the center of it, and just hit go.
Okay,
And
gotcha.
it probes the ring, rotates 180, probes the ring again, figures out the difference, knows where the center is, and then goes and calibrates.
So that way you don't have to be super precise on the probe then.
Exactly, yeah. And like I know our newer Matsura at work was the same way, because you could command the spindle to be 180 from itself. It
Right.
worked totally fine.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to look into that. I haven't really dove into, I would say, the nuts and bolts of the actual probing. I've only scratched the surface of what you can do with the probe. And that's something I was wondering about, was how do you make it better and more precise, right? So that's one interesting point.
Yeah, and I know some of them they'll even rotate the probe at like 50 RPM while it does the calibration, so it
Really
completely error or cancels out any error in the
interesting.
machine. Yeah, it's
Huh.
there's a lot of really advanced stuff that Renishaw allows you to do, that some machine tool builders take advantage of and some don't.
Sure. I will say the Haas probing routines are like the easiest thing in the world.
Yeah.
It's unbelievably simple.
Well, and like Payton saw Brad, he has the older VPSS
Yeah.
machines from '08, I think, and even his was stupid easy. So I'm sure the new graphical interface is probably even that much easier.
I literally had never used it before. I've had, I think we were talking about it. I've got maybe 40 to 60 hours on a Haas, an old like 98 something, maybe a 2000 VF3, prior to this machine, prior to getting this machine. And I was able to literally watch their videos and read the manual and hit the ground running. It's
That's
that
awesome.
simple to use. It's that easy to use.
I just checked. They bumped the price way up.
For pro,
Really?
Yeah, 7,500.
Woo.
I thought it was always $7,000.
No, it was like 5.
Oh, geez.
I don't remember what it was on my invoice. If you after this, you can text me and I'll try and look through my stuff and find it and see what it actually cost.
Dang, that's
Yeah,
crazy.
tell your house guy to hook you up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no kidding. They can. You might still be able to get some deals because Haas Tech just ended, I think, right?
Yeah, Friday, I think.
Friday. Yeah, so you might still be able to get some deals. You might ask them. Might be worth an ask.
Whoo.
Yeah, it's still worth it.
It's so
Like
worth it, man.
you will save that much time easily.
Come on, guys. I
It,
know
it
you're getting 10% each from this 7,500.
so
Like, I
here's
get
the other
it. I
thing,
get
Peyton.
it.
No, here's the other thing, right? This is the other awesome thing. So I walk in the shop in the afternoon for me, right?
Okay, rub it in. Here we
And
go.
and I turn the machine on, and if I know I'm going to have like a couple of tools that I need really tight blends with, or I change one tool, instead of just setting that tool, I tell it to set all tools, and I turn my back and walk away.
Yep.
Like I go do something else for that 3 minutes that it takes, or whatever, 5 minutes that it takes. Like
Yeah,
that's huge.
exactly. I'll like get my program almost done enough where I know my tools, load all my tools in the machine, hit go, and then finish the program and send it over while it's loading tools or while it's setting tools.
Right. Exactly. I do that a lot actually. Um, and then the other thing too, when you're building tools, right? So if you take tools out of the machine and put new ones in for whatever reason, and it's a different size or whatever, you tell it to probe that tool, and then I turn my back and go and start building the next tool while it's setting that tool. It
Yep.
takes all of the stress out of setting tools and
Yeah.
setting part locations.
Well, and you can dummy proof things. Like I just at work the other day updated a new or an old part number to added probing to it, and like the first thing it does is probe X on the part, X web, and if the
Right.
part is loaded the wrong way, it just errors out and says you loaded the part the wrong way.
Yep. Exactly.
Like
And
you
it's one
just pull
one
those
thing.
variables.
Right, exactly. And one thing I do too is I use I use all of my work offsets because with a lot of these parts, I'll have like 2 or 3 or 4 flips, so I'll just make each one a work offset, so I can step through the first one and then go back to op one for the second part, kind of thing. Um, and so the other thing, like you said, with dummy proofing, if it'll basically check to make sure you use the right work offset. So if you programmed it in G54, but it's supposed to be G55, and you tell it to probe, and it hits a surface it doesn't expect, it'll say, "Hey, what's going on? Something's wrong."
Yep. Exactly.
And which for an idiot like me, that's very helpful.
Yeah. Well, and like there's routines that you can't post out of Fusion yet, but like let's say you could load your part 180 from itself, but there's
Right.
only a hole on one side. You can just turn
Right.
on safe move
Yep.
and just have it safe move into that hole. And if that hole's not there, it'll hit the part and error out. Like things like
Right.
that. Like there's a
Right.
lot of dummy proofing you can do. It's fantastic.
Absolutely. If you know how to code the probing macros correctly, you can do the custom G code entry in Fusion too.
Oh yeah, yeah. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, I thought about doing that for something, but I was only running like 8 of them, and I was like, yeah, it's not really worth it. I'll just kind of babysit it a little bit, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I think it becomes more important when you have other people running your machines. Like Peyton's,
Absolutely.
talking about people using his machines, and so for you, Peyton, I think it would be fantastic. Like if you had a longer run,
Yep.
just to be able to dummy proof stuff.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, and even if you have someone else like building tools, right? If you know, if they're not careful with keeping gauge lengths correct or whatever, things like that, you can use the tool probe to kind of help dummy proof some of those kind of things too. So just it's something that's super valuable.
Yeah. All right, we beat you up enough, Peyton.
I'm
Yeah,
just shocked how
it's
much
all out
they
of love.
raised the price.
It's all out of love, Peyton. There's no hate.
Yeah,
Oh my god.
it's only because I know you will see the light too.
It's only because the child labor laws of probing.
And be careful. Don't bend over in front of Dylan in his shop. He might probe you.
Yo, I was being very careful.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, everybody's comments when we posted.
By the
Peyton were
way, because I never
fantastic.
addressed this in the last episode we just filmed, but I did not buy a brother. That was a joke. I was at Dylan's shop, and for those wondering, I do not own a brother as of right now.
Yeah.
Yet.
Yet. Yeah. Oh man.
It's funny.
So what else is going on in your world, Drew? You just released a new. You kind of touched on it, but a new product. So what are you
Yeah.
selling?
So the product I just released is a plate that goes onto the thermostat housing of a big block Ford engine, a 385 series, which would be their 429, 460 big block Fords. The reason that I released that was I needed one for my boat, and I said, well, I've got a machine shop. I'm going to make one because all the rest of the ones that were available were either junk or just didn't have what I needed. And I made one, and then my buddy called me like 6 months later, and he's like, "Hey, can you make me one?" I was like, "Okay." And then I was like, "What the hell? I'll post a picture of one on the Facebook group I'm a part of." And had one guy like, "Oh yeah, I'll take one." I'm like, okay, so maybe there is some interest here. So I made a run of them. I did, I think, 7 of them or something like that. I didn't do a ton of them. And we put them up on the website. They're live now. I want to say the as machined one is like $60, and the bead blasted one is like 64 or 63, something like that. It's in that ballpark. I don't remember the exact numbers. But basically, what I'm doing is there's a really big hole in the boating industry. Um, Everything is served toward General Motors for Chevrolet parts,
Mm-hmm.
but there's not a lot out there for the Ford guys. And the stuff that is out there is either really old, or it's coming from China, or it's custom, right? And it's really hard to get custom to be cheap, of course. So a lot of guys just shy away from it and either go to a Chevy, or they just use old, clapped out stuff or whatever. So this was the first one I would say, but then I had a customer call me about a week after I made these, and we're working on a motor plate and bell housing setup for a big block Ford, same engine, for a jet boat. that will adapt to a Messier brand starter and flex plate, and it puts the starter up on top, facing backwards from the engine instead of down below where they normally sit. So we're going to be developing that. I got a CAD model of a big block Ford. I got Messier sent me the CAD models to their starter and flex plate. So I'm starting to do the engineering side of that so that we can manufacture these. And my goal is to set this up to where it can be a semi, I would say a semi production part. It's not something where I expect to sell 100,000 of them, but it's something that we're going to try and move. So the products that we're going to start releasing and the services that I'm going to start releasing kind of to the general public are going to be more catered to this boat market for the I would say the near future because I've got so much interest right now. Hence the boat parts I said I was just making. I had one guy want these parts, and then I had a local shop hit me up for the exact same parts like 2 days later. So we're doing some of that kind of stuff. So I'm going to start throwing out some more services and then components on our website for the specifically for the Ford stuff, just because there's not a lot out there, not a lot available.
Awesome. Well, that's fantastic. That sounds like an untapped market, and right up your alley. I mean, I've seen a million pictures of you guys on the lake, so
Yeah.
that's awesome. As
Yeah.
an aside, I don't know if you watch the Cletus McFarlane YouTube channel.
Occasionally, I just saw some clips from Rocky Mountain Race Week, which I'm going to do someday.
Did you see him going on a ride in Mike Finnegan's jet boat?
Yes, and I watched every video of Mike Finnegan building that jet boat.
I thought that might be right up your alley.
Yeah.
I saw that recently, and I was like, "Oh, that looks like a great way to die." Like,
I don't know how that boat supports the weight of his balls.
oh man, yeah, it's frightening watching them do hole shots in that thing.
Oh man, like my boat's fast, right? Mine did 93 the last time we went out, right? That's a whole nother level. Like that boat will do 160 when it's all set up right
Whoa.
or
Right,
more.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's bananas, and like watching Cletus try to drive it and start going sideways in the water is
Mhm.
like, oh, okay.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That's a tunnel hull boat. So that's a placecraft tunnel hull, and those things pack air underneath them. So he's not riding on water. He's riding on air. The only thing that's in the water is the jet pump.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and even the nozzle for the jet pump is not in the water. Just the intake for the jet pump.
Right. Yeah. I just couldn't. I like never had thought about jet boats really, and then when he was talking about like, oh, you've got to push this button to give a pop off to the inlet
Yeah.
of the jet, otherwise you'll just like dive into the water. I was like, oh, I guess I never really thought about that.
Yeah, it's like any other pump, right? You don't want to deadhead it. So when you let off the throttle, if you don't hit that pop off, it builds up pressure in front of the impeller because you're still going 160,
Right.
but the engine's no longer spinning, or at least not that fast. So that's a major issue.
yeah, it's absolutely insane. So a segment we usually do with Peyton and I, but I think is a great thing for returning guests is what are you researching recently?
Oh, let's
Can be
see.
machining related. It can be
Yeah.
totally random related. We all have weird YouTube deep dives from time to
Oh
time of
yeah.
like the weirdest stuff. So what are you up to?
Let's see. There was something I was looking at just the other day. What the hell was it? That was super off the wall. Um, I can't remember. It was kind of interesting, but I don't remember what the hell it was. Um, I've been watching some like documentaries and stuff. Oh, that's what it was. I do remember. So I don't know if you guys have seen the movie Radioactive. It's about Marie Curie. So I'm a physicist and I'm a huge tech nerd, right? So Marie Curie was the basically founder of radioactive physics, right? That's her whole thing. And I watched the movie Radioactive, and then I started doing research on her and nuclear physics. And one of the things I found immensely fascinating was I stumbled across this picture, which was a picture from, I believe it was the 1927 International something or other. It was like a gathering of scientists. In that picture was Marie Curie, Albert Einstein, Werner Heisenberg, um, uh, Dr. Schrodinger, and there was another one. All of those people were the foundations of modern physics, and it just blew my mind. Like all of those people were the people that I learned about in school in my physics degree who have constants named after them. Like that was just my I know it's probably nothing to non-physics nerds, but like that just blew my mind. and it's just amazing. It was amazing to me how um, how many of the most intelligent people to ever walk the face of the earth existed at this same time.
I know exactly what picture you're talking about. It's I just looked it up. It's the Solvay conference picture.
Yeah. So I can read off a couple of names that stick out to me. Sarah just handed me the photo. So Schrodinger, I don't remember how you pronounce it. Heisenberg, De Broglie, let's see, Einstein, Lorentz. I forgot about Lorentz. Niels Bohr. Um, I mean, Dirac. Let's see,
Planck.
Bragg, Planck. Yep. I mean, that's just. I mean, that was all of them. That's everything. Like Niels Bohr was the guy that figured out how the atom looked. Like that's just amazing to me. I know this is super nerdy and totally off topic, but like that just was the most fundamentally like that group of people fundamentally changed our world forever.
Yeah, it's crazy to see them all together. I didn't realize that they all overlapped like that.
Right. And the one that's not in that picture but is actually still alive, I think for another couple of years or he might maybe just died, was Nikola Tesla. And there's a quote from Albert Einstein back in that time when they were still alive together. Some reporter asked him, well, "What's it like being the smartest man alive?" And he goes, "I don't know. Go ask Nikola Tesla." So I'm a total nerd. So that's kind of that whole side of my brain that you just saw a piece of.
No, that's awesome. That's why we asked the question, is because there's we all love machining, but we all love weird stuff that relates to our day jobs or personal interests, and so it's always cool to see what people are researching.
Yeah. And I've been doing a ton of stuff with 3D printing recently. Like I've been using the hell out of my Prusa printer, and then my cousin and I, he's got a Prusa as well, and so we've been spitballing back and forth. And what we came up with is we're going to build. I don't know when, but it's going to be semi soon. An overgrown Prusa. We're actually going to buy a Prusa Mark III, i3 MK3, or Mark IV, depending on what they come out with, and I'm going to take every part that they give you for the frame and supersize it to make it like a 2x2x2 size. And then a friend of his is a programmer for a very, very large tech company, very talented guy, and he's going to kind of hack the board a little bit to just to be able to tell the printer that it's bigger than what it is, or what it thinks it is, I should say.
That's a cool
So that way we
project.
can use, yeah, so that way we can use all of the Prusa standard interface, right? So you can use all of the engineering that they've done to your advantage.
That's awesome. That'd be super cool.
Yeah,
I watch 3D Printing Nerd on YouTube from time to time, and most
I'll have to look that
recently
one up.
he had that giant printer on there. It was like a double nozzle, but I want
Okay.
to say it was like a meter by a meter by three-quarters of a meter,
Jeez.
half a meter tall print volume. And like the first thing he did was try to print this giant rook on it and broke the giant glass bed because it adhered too well.
Yep, yep.
Um,
I know that too well.
so yeah, but he's definitely a strange guy, but he always has some really cool printers on his channel.
Yeah, actually, one of the applications of 3D printing that I realized a couple days ago. So I don't want to jump the gun too much because I'm not sure if I'm not sure if I'm gonna have enough time to release these things. But we're gonna make, um, we made some keychains last year for Valentine's Day, and I plan on making more for other holidays and doing some other things with that because I got a lot of interest. Well, I figured out a way to use 3D printing for my fixtures because the shapes are so oddball of them, and if you had to make a fixture for every different type, you would never be able to make any money. And so I figured out a way a couple days ago to be able to literally 3D print my fixtures. I'm going to hopefully test it either this week or next week. We'll see.
Really? Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I'll definitely stay tuned to that. I want to hear how you're doing it for sure.
Yeah, I'll send you guys some pictures as things go along. I'll post stuff too. I have the design of the part done. I need to design the fixture. I'm just going to do a one piece fixture for the first one. But my plan is I can fit. I believe I can fit 20 of these things on the bed of the Prusa, and then I can have room for fasteners and things like that. So I'm going to then try and do a 20 part run with it basically. So I'll print the fixture, bolt the fixture down, and then be able to run these parts in the machine.
Awesome. That's fantastic. Yeah, I haven't used any 3D printed hardware for machining fixtures, but I do it all the time at my day job for inspection fixtures for our
Yep.
CMM, and it works fantastic.
Yep. So we'll see. I don't know exactly how it's going to work for the machining fixture, but all the stuff I'm going to be doing is going to be very small diameter tooling, like eighth ball nose surfacing. So the tool pressures are going to be very low. So I'm not worried about the parts moving too much in the fixture. And I think I came up with a pretty clever way to actually hold them down into the fixture. But I don't want to give away the secret sauce.
Don't give away
All
the
right.
sauce.
Yeah, no sauce. We'll talk about it later for sure.
Yep. So, but that was my what I researched for the week or whatever.
Awesome. Well, that's good stuff for sure.
What about you guys? What did you research?
Go ahead, Peyton. What did we just say?
Yeah, seriously. I was looking into what are they called? Sarah jaws, and then I can't remember what else I said. What I can't remember. Dylan, do you remember what I said?
I don't, but yeah, so Peyton bought some of those Sarah jaws that I use in my vise, because they're fantastic for first ops.
Sure.
Trying to think of what else you said, Peyton.
I can't remember. There was something though.
Yeah, and then I've been researching a lot of stuff for my car because I'm going to a aftermarket ECU, and I just bought my Speeduino for it, and so I've been going through the manual and figuring out how I'm going to wire everything and what wires I can steal from the stock harness to do some new stuff because like I'm getting rid of the AFM and going to a map sensor.
Yep.
So I can reuse those wires for like I'm going to a coil on pack instead of a distributor.
Yep.
And there's a lot of setup that I need to get done.
Post pictures and stuff about that. Super interesting to me because I've looked into like DIY auto tune a lot over the years for various different things. But I had never heard of that until you mentioned it. So that's something I'd be totally interested in seeing more about.
Yeah, totally. It's the price is like really what drew me to it. Like
Sure.
we just said on the last episode we recorded, I was gonna make my own board for my car and like use the stock connector, but I ended up just buying one because the U.S. distributor of Speeduino, you can buy a fully assembled board for $150.
You can't beat that with a stick, man. That's insane.
Yeah, I mean,
$150.
yeah, and it's full sequential up to 4 cylinders, both spark and ignition,
Wow,
or
that's awesome.
spark and fuel. I mean, so
Yeah.
it should be pretty fantastic. And yeah, you just brought it on an Arduino, which seems like on one hand I feel dirty running a car off of an Arduino, but at the same time, like if it works, I'm all about it. So I'll definitely post some pictures and videos of it running and all that stuff because it's going to be pretty fantastic. Like it's just starting to get more supported, and yeah, it should be a lot of fun.
Nice. That's super cool, man. Yeah, it's always neat to look into that kind of stuff, especially when it's something new.
Yeah, well, I at this point I have to do something because the Toyota ignition system that I have in my car is just garbage. Like they do the stupidest things in the 80s. So
Yeah. Well, that wasn't unique to Toyota.
no, but like I can't go and get an igniter from anybody else because my igniter also does signal decoding from my distributor.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so they run the VR signal back through the igniter and it turns it into a square wave. And so like I have to use my year igniter exactly, otherwise it doesn't work.
That's fun.
Yeah, so it's stupid stuff like that where you're like, oh, thanks Toyota, I hate you too.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's more or less what I was. I'm very ready for it, and the second that I had the money, I was like, oh screw it, I'm just gonna buy the board and get it done and
Yep.
just have fun.
For sure. Sometimes buying a little thing like that makes more difference.
Oh yeah, well, and I was gonna spend $80 anyway getting the boards made,
Right.
and then I would have had to solder it all myself and
Right.
hope that it worked. And it's like, my time is worth more than that.
Yep.
So,
Yep. Cool. That's awesome.
yeah.
Well, is there anything else, Drew, other than that? I mean, if you want to plug your website where you can get your products that we
Sure.
talked about.
Yeah, so website is drewbuilt.com. So it's DREWBUILT.com. And you can search for Drewfab. We're the Drewfab in Lakeside. There's two of us. One's in Ohio, I think. But yeah, so we're on Instagram. I believe it's at Drew Built on Instagram. I just noticed that the other day. I have to double check that. But the Instagram is Drewfab, and then no, I'm sorry, the Instagram is at Drewfab, but the Facebook is Drew Built. And so you can search for it that way. But we're in Lakeside, California, and you can find everything that we're doing either on the website or on the social media. But the social media is also on the website too, and it'll link you straight to the Instagram.
Awesome.
Awesome. Well, hey, thanks for coming back, Drew. It's
Yeah.
always a blast to talk to you, and it's nice to clue everybody else in on our conversations. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been fun. Sorry to take up an hour and 40 minutes, but it was fun.
No, that's why we invited you on
Yeah.
for sure. We like nerding out with other like-minded people.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. And guys, we'll be back next week with another episode.